My name is Jake Zavskin, and I'll be your facilitator this morning, as well as moderating our chat for the panel for any questions that may come up during our webinar. I'm joined by my colleague Joe Goodwin, who will be walking us through our material today. Welcome to Preventing Web and Email Server Attacks. So what are we looking at today, Joe?
So good morning, everybody. Today in this 1 hour session, we'll first review the essential information you'll need to identify, prevent, and respond to web and email server attacks using the IMR framework, Identify, Mitigate, and Recover framework. During the second half of the course, we'll apply the core concepts in the IMR framework to review real-world cases of documented web and email server attacks against Department of Health and Human Services, a major motion picture studio, and the World Trade Organization, before we then finish with a quick knowledge check.
All right, that all sounds great. So let's give us a little background on how web and email servers actually function.
Sure. Web and email servers are the invisible infrastructure that allow you and everyone else in the world to access the internet, interact with your favorite websites, and communicate virtually through electronic messaging and email. In other words, web and email servers are the workhorses of the internet, and their ubiquity across the internet make them easy targets for cyber threat actors. This course provides key awareness and understanding of web and email servers, points of vulnerability, and best practices for prevention and mitigation that enable you to protect yourself and your organization from web and email servers. We will use the Identify, Mitigate, and Recover framework to define what constitutes a web or email server attack, review cyber hygiene best practices that reduce the chance of successful attacks if implemented, and describe the organizational impacts of these attacks and the key steps to prepare your organization to respond effectively to an attack. We'll also provide real-world examples illustrating the impacts of successful web and email server attacks, how the target organization was impacted, and their response and recovery. So a web, just provide some background on both web and email servers. A web server is software or hardware that uses HTTP and other protocols to respond to client requests made over the World Wide Web. If data sent over an HTTP connection is unencrypted, then the information is not private and constitutes an easily exploited privacy vulnerability, as website data and any user-submitted information, including search terms and payment credentials, can easily be extracted. Web server software controls how a user accesses hosted files. It is accessed through the domain names of websites and ensures the delivery of the site's content to the requesting user. As hardware, web server is a computer that holds web server software and other files related to a website, such as HTML documents, images, or JavaScript files. Web server hardware is connected to the internet and allows data to be exchanged with other connected devices. An email server, or simply a mail server, is an application or computer in a network whose sole purpose is to act as a virtual post office. The server stores incoming mail for distribution to local users and sends out outgoing messages. An email server is a computer with a mail transfer agent functions, or MTA functions. Mail can be exchanged between email servers running special software which is built around standardized protocols for handling these messages and their varied multimedia content. So phishing emails and the use of unencrypted HTTP remain persistent channels through which malicious actors can exploit vulnerabilities in an organization's cybersecurity posture. Attackers may spoof a domain to send a phishing email that looks like it's a legitimate email. At the same time, users transmitting data via unencrypted HTTP protocol, which does not protect data from interception or alteration, are vulnerable to eavesdropping, tracking, and the modification of data.
Well, that sounds like there are some serious vulnerabilities.
Yeah, there are many ways that an attacker can target web and email servers. For web servers, data sent over HTTP is susceptible to interception, manipulation, impersonation, particularly if it's not encrypted. Sending data over an unencrypted connection allows any third party or threat actor to pick up, read, redirect, or even modify the information that's being exchanged. This data can include browser identity, website content, search terms, and other user-submitted information. Unencrypted HTTP connections create a privacy vulnerability and expose potentially sensitive information about the users of those unencrypted websites and those services. For email servers, attackers can spoof the domain of a reputable organization and send an email that looks to be a legitimate email. Other organizations or members of the public might receive these spoofed emails, perceive them to be from an authoritative source, and then go ahead and act on them. Internal employees may assume spoofed emails are legitimate and then act upon them. If an attacker is successfully spoofing a domain in order to send malicious emails from it, this can significantly harm the affected organization's reputation.
Thanks, Joe. Can you walk us through a few more different types of web and email server attacks?
Absolutely. So the common types of web server attacks include the following: side channel attacks, SQL injections, malware, and cross-site scripting. So side channel attacks attempt to break cryptography by using information leaked by hardware performing the cryptographic process instead of focusing on the cryptographic algorithm itself. This can be done through monitoring power consumption, electromagnetic emissions, or even the sound of a user's keystrokes. SQL injections aim to modify databases and or extract valuable information from your server by placing malicious code in SQL statements on a web page. Malware. This involves placing harmful software into your database. Usually the software includes viruses or ransomware that can destroy your data. And then cross-site scripting is a kind of injection breach in which the attacker injects malicious scripts into otherwise benign and reputable websites. And last but not least, denial of service or DDoS attacks are one of the most prevalent types of server attacks that we will dive into over the next couple of slides.
Okay, good. I would really like to learn a little more about DDoS attacks. I feel like those are the big ones we always hear about in the news.
They are. So denial of service attacks are one of the most common types of attacks and aim to shut down a network or service to render it inaccessible to the users. This attack does this by overwhelming the target network with traffic by flooding it with requests, usually utilizing a botnet. So a botnet is a cluster of computers or other machines that have been infected with malware that allows for the attacker to gain remote control over them, and then in the DOS attack, spam requests to the target IP address, which causes strain and potentially makes an online service completely unavailable to users, overwhelming the system. This can deny legitimate access to the users on that network, obviously. The motivations for these types of attacks can be financial, they can be revenge against companies or individuals, they could be ideological, they could be simply for an intellectual challenge or personal enjoyment by the attacker, cyberbullying, or in an extreme case, cyber war.
Okay, time for a quick question for the group. Have you personally, or has your organization, ever been the victim of a DDoS or denial of service attack?
So we will be bringing up a survey, or you can answer in the, here we go. We'll bring up a survey. You can go ahead and put your responses there just to take a pulse of the audience in terms of who's had experience with these type of attacks. Again, we're looking at either personally or professionally, and by that we mean aware that your organization has been a victim of one of these attacks. So it's good. It looks like a lot of the folks on the line have not had experience. That's very good. Those that have, looks like a couple more have had experience with the organization, but given that we're all working for government, this is encouraging that not a ton of folks have had a lot of experience with this. So that's good. Okay, we will move on to the next slide. So who is susceptible to these types of attacks? Basically, anyone hosting a web or email server connected to the internet is susceptible to a DOS attack. As long as the server is connected and can receive legitimate requests from users, it can also be the target of the attackers. These attacks are also often targeted at web servers of high-profile organizations such as trade organizations and government or media companies, commerce, and banks. Although these attacks don't result in a loss or theft of vital information or other assets, they can cost the victim tons of money and time to mitigate. These attacks often are used in combination with other network attacks as a distraction from other types of attacks which are conducted in parallel. Those attacks may be the ones doing actual damage.
Okay, I see how a company can be vulnerable, but what is the potential fallout?
So a few numbers and things to think about here. So according to research conducted in 2019, the biggest impacts of these denial of service attacks are loss of consumer trust, the theft of intellectual property, the threat of a malware infection, or financial loss from loss of e-commerce due to downtime or delay in websites. The resource-intensive mitigation efforts have a financial impact, and also lost productivity. So bear in mind these attacks also impact the ability of sales teams to acquire new customers, and in increasingly competitive markets, especially where literally time is money, when these systems go down, it costs the organizations a lot of money and indirect impact. Then last but not least is the damage to a company's reputation that could have negative consequences for customers and their loyalty, or, as we discussed, profits. Because of the increasing number of IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, that will be connected to the internet in the coming years, which is booming, these devices can be compromised and utilized in botnets, since many device manufacturers don't necessarily focus on device security as a priori, as their number one concern. So it's something to keep in mind. So with all this, what are some signs that that a DOS attack is taking place? So some of the signs that can indicate that the network is being targeted include unavailability of websites, unusually slow network performance with opening files or websites, failover of your firewall and your backend systems, and overloaded network security solutions. In terms of prevention and mitigation, the following are key to preventing and mitigating these types of attacks, and should be in place in case of an adverse event. So develop a denial of service response plan. The plan should include sections such as system checklist, response team notification and escalation procedures, and a list of internal and external contacts who you can quickly reach out to. You should secure your network infrastructure with advanced intrusion prevention and threat management systems, which these combine firewalls, VPN, anti-spam, content filtering, load balancing, and other layers of DOS defense techniques. Definitely practice basic network security, which includes complex passwords that change on a regular, frequent basis and prompt your users to do so, anti-phishing methods and training, and secure firewalls that allow little outside traffic. Maintain strong network architecture with redundant network resources, which is also known as a failover plan or failovers. So if one server is attacked, the others can handle that extra network traffic that's coming in. Leverage the cloud. Cloud has far more bandwidth and resources than a private network likely does. If you suspect that you're being targeted by a DOS attack, contact your network administrator to begin mitigation. And your administrator can determine whether the service outage or the degradation is due to maintenance or another in-house network issue. They can also monitor network traffic to confirm the presence of an attack, then identify the source, and mitigate the situation by applying firewall rules and possible rerouting of traffic through a denial of service protection service. You can also contact your ISP or your internet service provider to ask if there's an outage on their end, or if the network is the target of an attack and you are an indirect victim, collateral damage, and something against the ISP. They may be able to advise you on appropriate course of action. In terms of recovering, you can begin with an initial assessment of the incident and reviewing your existing service level agreements with your security vendors to validate that they have satisfied their commitments. Next, you can assess the incident damages and prioritize vulnerabilities and recovery actions. There should be internal discussions to prioritize remediation of the most critical vulnerabilities found. Your team should also implement or should also determine how to harden your network to prevent future incidents. So you may notice that there are overlaps between the signs of a DOS attack and other types of web and email server attacks. This is expected to be since DOS attacks are one of the most common types of server attacks, and the purpose of many attacks is to cause disruption or harm to the organization. Common signs of web and email server attacks include your computer is running slower than usual, your security solution is disabled, or unusual icons or error messages appeared. These systems may indicate that you have been infected with malware, which would allow an attacker to take control over the workstations and servers, which can then be exploited to change privileges, gain access to sensitive information, monitor users' activities, and perform other malicious actions. Second, you notice spam and phishing emails being sent to users across your enterprise. Spam emails can disrupt user productivity, utilize IT resources excessively, and be used as a distribution mechanism for malware. Related to spam is phishing, which refers to the use of deceptive social engineering and computer-based means to trick individuals into responding to the email and disclosing sensitive information. Third is to access to emails and other network resources has slowed or is inaccessible altogether. This may indicate that you're being affected by a denial of service or directed denial of service attack. So the impacts of not properly securing your email server can include reputational damage to you and your organization, unauthorized access to data, which can cause financial, legal, or continued reputational damage, the threat of data leakage. Personal data is one of the key targets for hackers. When an email is sent via the internet, it goes through unprotected communication channels in which passwords, usernames, and the content of the messages themselves could be intercepted and cause reputational, financial, and legal damage. Spam. This is one of the biggest problems when it comes to email. To prevent this threat, you need to use content filters, which can be installed either on the mail server or on a proxy application to protect access to the server. Excessive spam can burden inboxes, as we all know. This lowers productivity and is risking financial damage if a malicious email slips past security measures and an individual takes action on that email. They click a link or they download a file that enables an attacker to access your network. The threat of malware, both servers and email clients are susceptible to malware. When an email server is infected, the stability of the entire system can be compromised. Integrity and privacy of personal data are threatened. Malware can also spread among email clients, mostly due to infected attachments, and then cause, again, significant financial or reputational damage to an organization. Then last but not least, we have poor server performance and stability, which can lead to the deception that your site is either broken or doesn't work to the end user. The steps for preventing and mitigating server attacks can include identification of key assets. It may be cost prohibitive to protect the entire enterprise. So before creating an cyber incident plan, an organization should determine which of its data, which of its assets, and which of its services warrant the most protection in case of an attack. You can triage those or do a risk assessment to determine what the most at risk or impactful would be. Create an incident response plan. Similar to mitigating a denial of service attacks, the most important response to mitigating a server attack is adhering to the organization's response plan. Creating an actionable plan with procedures for managing and responding to a server attack, stakeholders to notify, and the escalation procedures can mitigate attacks by helping organizations limit the damage to their computer networks and minimize those work stoppages. Definitely engage with law enforcement even before an attack. Having those pre-existing relationships with federal law enforcement officials or state and local law enforcement officials can help mitigate any interaction related to a breach and helps establish a trusted relationship that then cultivates that bidirectional information sharing. And stay informed about threats. An organization's awareness of new or commonly exploited vulnerabilities can help it prioritize its security measures. There are organizations that share real-time intelligence on cyber threats, such as Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, or ISACs, which provides cyber threat information for public and private sector organizations. Similar to recovering from denial of service attacks, the steps for recovering from other types of web and email server attacks follow the same outline. After your initial assessment of the incident, review your existing service level agreements with your security vendors to ensure they have satisfied their commitments. Continue your assessment to capture the full extent of the damage and keep detailed records and logs along the way. Prioritize the remediation of vulnerabilities found and work to eventually harden your network from those future attacks.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, now that we've gone over the basics of web and email attacks, let's take a look at actual examples. We'll review case studies of real-world situations in which Department of Health and Human Services, Major Motion Picture Studio, and the World Trade Organization were affected by web or email server attacks. These incidents reflect the spectrum of best case and worst case scenarios for the respective organizations affected. Joe, can you walk us through them?
Absolutely. So let's first look at the Department of Health and Human Services DDoS attack. So in March of 2020, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services suffered a cyber attack on their network. The source of the attack has not been publicly confirmed, but open source reports theorize that foreign actors were attempting to exploit the initial COVID-19 crisis to promote anti-American goals and spread misinformation. The attackers, who have not been identified, launched a directed denial of service attack and attempted to overwhelm the HHS network with millions of requests from their botnet. The target was a public-facing HHS website in an attempt to disrupt users from accessing information and announcements related to COVID-19. At the same time, a number of other reports related to COVID-19 and possible mandatory national quarantine were coming out in an effort to spread that misinformation and fear. The attack overloaded the HHS servers with millions of hits over several hours. However, the attack did not succeed in slowing down the agency's network significantly, since HHS was very well prepared. So good on HHS. The attack was noticed by agency staff due to a significant increase in activity on their network. CISA helped to mitigate and prevent additional similar attacks by increasing cyber preparedness across federal civilian agencies, including enhanced monitoring, issuing recommendations as agencies shift to a telework or remote model, and identifying and protecting important systems that support the COVID-19 response effort. After investigation and analysis, it was determined that there was no penetration into and no significant degradation of the HHS network. And while it was suspected that foreign state actors were involved in the attack, the U.S. administration has not confirmed ultimately who was responsible. So we have another Ask the Audience here. We'd like to know, has telework here in COVID-19 negatively affected or negatively impacted your ability to maintain effective monitoring of your networks? And are these challenges able to be addressed? Good. It seems like responses are very positive and that networks have not been negatively impacted in this new environment that we have in telework, and that challenges that come up can be addressed. Again, that's fantastic that we've all been able to adapt from a security posture given the new telework environment that we are in. Excellent. So our next case study highlights the damage that a successful cyber attack can have on organizations, financially, operationally, and definitely reputationally. So in November of 2014, hackers from a group dubbed Guardians of Peace broke into the network of one of the, quote, Big Six major movie studios. They stole a large number of confidential documents and materials and posted the information online over the following month. The leaked information included at least 5 full-length movies, detailed personal identifiable information of thousands of employees, tens of thousands of email exchanges, and confidential information regarding lawsuits and major financial deals. The attackers used the stolen information as ransom, demanding that the studio cancel the release and distribution of a specific movie. The studio canceled the film release, but as often happens with cases of ransom, the leaks did not stop, inundating the studio with a barrage of costly and embarrassing revelations about the company and its executives. The movie in question was later released, but quashing the initial rollout cost the studio an estimated $75 million just for that movie, and while that loss was ultimately reimbursed through insurance policies, the revelations from the trove of leaked information would result in major reputational harm and financial costs far beyond the loss of a single film's box office revenue.
Okay, that one I definitely remember, and some of those emails were interesting, and also some were really damaging.
They were very damaging to the individuals. It's still unclear how the malware known as Destover was introduced into the studio's network. A cybersecurity firm that reviewed the incident purported that I'm sorry, let me just fix our slides here. Get us back on correct slide. There we go. So the software known, or the malware known as Destover, was introduced to the studio's network. A cybersecurity firm that reviewed the incident reported that an educated guess would be that someone was targeted with a spear phishing email, which then granted access to the system. The hackers then escalated privileges and took control of the mail server and possibly the Active Directory. From there, the hackers owned the system. Expert consensus attributes an unidentified individual with insider access to the network as instrumental to that attack's success. While the FBI linked the attackers to the North Korean government, no individuals have been publicly identified or prosecuted, and the case remains under investigation. The hack revealed confidential information on financing, casting, and pre-production details that forced the studio to scrap or alter plans for numerous major film projects. More than 11,000 leaked files containing hundreds of employee usernames and passwords as well as RSA secure ID tokens and certificates that were used to authenticate users and systems at the company. Information dealing how to access staging and production database servers, including a master asset list mapping the location of the company's databases and servers around the world, were also leaked. The documents also include a list of routers, switches, and load balancers, and then the usernames and passwords that the administrators used to manage them. So this information basically gave attackers complete control over the entire network before they were discovered, and then forced the studio to rebuild their entire network as part of the recovery. The studio said in an earnings report that the hack would cost $35 million in, quote, investigation and remediation costs. That would be over the next fiscal year following the incident. Then they agreed to pay $15 million to its employees who were affected by having their PII leaked, the emails and social security numbers. This incident, in combination with previous cyber incidents, caused significant damage to the company's security reputation. So in addition to this initial monetary cost of the PII and the user account information stolen, the hacks brought to light some pretty embarrassing details of workplace culture and studio executives' communications that became public knowledge through the leak, widely publicizing evidence of a toxic work environment and requiring a comprehensive rehabilitation of the studio's image. The stolen documents showed evidence of a culture of racism, sexism, and patterns of workplace abuse on set and in office. Multiple email threads showed C-level executives participating in openly racist conversations about prominent black actors and celebrities, including political figures like President Obama. Additionally, email threads included executives commenting on the bodies of actresses and employees and using derogatory terms to address female talent during and after business negotiations. Details of contract negotiations revealed a systemic gender pay gap, with female actors receiving less money across the board compared to their male co-stars. Finally, the leak documented a pattern of certain directors' propensity for on-set abuse, even as the studio continued to hire those directors for subsequent projects. To recover from these allegations, a comprehensive and costly image rehabilitation was undertaken to address these problems. So, how was this attack identified? Unfortunately, employees didn't notice the hack until after it was too late. The first sign of compromise was seen when studio employees who tried to log in their computers were greeted with a graphic of a neon red skeleton featuring the words hashtag hacked by hashtag GOP. GOP being Guardians of Peace. And a threat, along with this came a threat to release stolen data later that night if an unspecified request was not met. All of the company's computers running Windows software were affected by the malware, which was designed to steal data and then wipe the target machine to make the network inoperable. The studio was forced to shut down its entire computer network to prevent further damage. Over the coming weeks, multiple statements and threats attributed to the hacker group GOP were posted online, many to a text sharing site called Pastebin. After the attack was initially identified, the company advised employees to turn off their Wi-Fi on their devices and begin to block access to their network. After the internal network was shut down, employees were forced to use pen and paper for at least a week until the network could be rebuilt and hardened. The company also contacted the FBI to investigate and enlisted cyber forensics unit from Mandiant and the security firm FireEye to assist in the search for the hackers. Executives urged employees to utilize the identity protection services that were offered to employees in case their PII was compromised. The studio also issued a statement to news publications and bloggers to warn them against using or spreading the breached data that had been publicly posted around the entire world. Nonetheless, Embarrassing and shocking details from the leaks were reported for several weeks following the incident, and several yet-to-be-released films were posted to piracy sites for users to stream and download. So this case study is a reminder of the many different ways in which a successful cyber attack can impact an organization, not only operationally and financially, but reputationally as well. The hack not only leaked the secrets and skeletons of many studio executives, it dragged those revelations into the public eye through weeks of voracious comprehensive coverage that ensured the most shocking details were highlighted in a wave of media coverage consumed by virtually all Americans and hundreds of millions of people around the world. In our final case study, we will recount a real-life example of a SQL injection attack. On April 30th of 2015, hackers from the group Anonymous targeted the World Trade Organization, the WTO, with a SQL injection attack to steal and leak information, including company database and personal information of its correspondents to the public. The hackers targeted the ecampus.wto.org domain, which is used by the WTO to provide online courses on international trade law and other trade-related matters, with a SQL injection to run commands on WTO databases. This allowed the hackers to retrieve information from WTO databases that contained confidential information and other PII, including administrative login credentials for WTO employees and job candidates, and exposed over 53,000 email addresses of website users. Personal staff and officials' leaked data included first and last names, access IDs, email addresses, IP addresses, user roles, phone numbers, job positions, current employment throughout embassies, zip codes, and supervisors' first and last names. The leak affected over 2,100 officials and staff members of the World Trade Organization. Leaked information also contained the World Trade Organization database and admin login credentials for over 58 different administrators. Anonymous hackers leaked first and last names and phone numbers and job positions of all of these administrators. Additionally, the leaked data contained personal information for an additional 34 administrators. Members of Anonymous who claimed responsibility for the hacking announced their involvement on Twitter on April 30th of 2015. The announcement arrived under the banner of, quote, Operation Green Rights, a campaign purporting to fight big corporations and governments in the name of environmental protection.
So it sounds like an organization like WTO would be very aware that they're targeted groups like Anonymous, but even so, they're still vulnerable.
Correct. Following the incident, WTO spokesman stated that, quote, we are still conducting our forensic study of this attack, but what we can say now for sure is that the integrity of other WTO systems has not been compromised. In the meantime, our IT team are repairing and buttressing the eCampus site in hopes of getting it up and running again very soon. For now, staff and delegates to the World Trade Organization should remain on high alert for fishy, excuse the pun, emails. If attackers or spies successfully dupe their targets, they could use further compromised accounts as a way to attack other networks, including those of affiliated governments.
Okay, so that's all really helpful info, Joe. So, and everybody, this concludes the scenario portion of the webinar. Now we'll finish up today by walking through a knowledge check, reviewing some of the core concepts and takeaways from this course. We'll cover 6 multiple choice questions. When the question is read, make a note of your answer, and after a few moments, we'll discuss the correct answer. So follow along and see how you do. So first, approximately how many DOS attacks occur every minute?
So we have a lot of folks think it's 1600, and a lot of folks think it is 16. Not a whole lot of takers on 160. And let's see, got a fair number of respondents in. Okay, so the correct answer on this is 16. But I'll do the math for you. That equates to over 23,000 DOS attacks per day, which is still pretty staggering. And then you just aggregate and continue to add up from there as you go into weekly and monthly and yearly.
No, for sure, that still adds up. Which of the following are consequences businesses face from DOS attacks?
It looks like most people, everybody, somebody changed their answer. That's good. Agree that yes, it is all of the above. That loss of the revenue, the theft of intellectual property, and the loss of consumer trust are absolutely faces consequences from those attacks. Excellent. Next one.
So signs of DOS attack on your network include the following, except which of these?
Boy, everybody's jumping on that first one really fast. And okay, got a couple folks looking at overloaded network security solutions. Somebody looking at back-end systems operating at max. So with, I think, most respondents in, the answer is faster than normal loading of websites. Actually, this is the opposite of an indicator of a DOS attack. Things will mostly slow down a lot, so there'll be much slower times in the loading of those sites. Excellent. Moving on to the next question.
All of the following are common types of server attacks, except which of these?
Okay, got one SQL injection.
Oh, no, we switched over.
Nope, switched. A lot of folks, everybody so far going on the watering hole attack.
It's never too late to make the right choice.
Can't trick anybody. That is correct. Watering hole attack. This is an attacker guessing which website an organization uses to then go ahead and try and compromise that organization through that site. Well done. Moving on to the next question.
So which of the following are proactive measures to take for preventing and mitigating against an email server attack?
And so far, everybody thinks that it is all of those.
Okay, we were all pretty sure of it this time.
Yep. And out of the gate, everybody's on all the above. Well done. So yes, perhaps that was too obvious. All of those are those proactive measures for preventing and mitigating those attacks. Excellent. Okay, and our last question.
In the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, DOS attacks in March 2020, what are precautions that CISA put in place to protect the nation's networks from cyber threats during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Again, everybody's identifying all of them. Very good. All of those measures, again, those enhanced monitoring, the issuance of the recommendations, and identifying and protecting those systems especially particular to COVID, were extraordinarily helpful out of CISA stepping up and providing timely support and response. So great job. Okay, so with that, just want to provide some key takeaways from the presentation here this morning. So as we look at DDoS, it's important to remember to develop a response plan. Again, the system checklists, the list of contacts of response teams and what their responsibilities are, what to do to notify and escalate procedures, and then that list of external contacts as well as internal who can be reached out to support the response. Make sure your network infrastructure is secure. That cyber hygiene is critically important, not just to prevent DDoS attacks, but in general. Cyber hygiene is one of the most important things we have to remember to continue to do. Maintain that strong network architecture. As discussed, the cloud has tons of room to move around in. So leverage the cloud if possible. And also understand those warning signs of a DOS attack, some of which we just reviewed in the knowledge check. And then on the web and email security side, similarly, you want to have a good response plan in place for managing and responding to that cyber intrusion. Establish and practice those procedures to address the steps you need to take after an attack. Prioritize your assets and your data and the services, whether through risk assessment, taking risk management approach, triaging those things, so you know which are most important and which to protect and preserve first, among others. Assess the nature and the scope of the incidents to identify the type of damage and what type of assistance is needed and the remedial efforts are required. And then, as with DOS, and again, good practice across the board, establish those pre-existing relationships with federal law enforcement officials, as well as, to the extent that it makes sense, depending on your situation, state and local. We want to facilitate information exchange and those interactions before bad things happen, just as we do on the non-cyber traditional physical protection side, so that we can work better together in the immediate response and recovery stage. Lastly, just a few resources to consider and to look up. Understanding denial of service attacks out of CISA. The 2019 Denial of Service Threat Report from NetScout. Out of Cybercrime Magazine, 2019 Cybersecurity Almanac is a useful resource. And again, going into CISA, looking at the CISA Cyber Insights document are absolutely tremendous resources across a variety of topics, including web and email server attacks, but many others that we've even done webinars on. So another go-to tremendous resource out of CISA in the CISA Insights documents. So Jake, I will throw it back to you.
Thank you all for your participation. The certificate of completion is available for download, and have a wonderful day.